All right, I have 11 o'clock on the dot Central Time. So good morning and good afternoon. We'll get started with the opening slides here while the remainder of people get into the webinar. So welcome. My name is Matt Karst. I'm the marketing specialist for Rainbow. And just a few housekeeping slides to get us started. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to type them into the Q&A box. Please refrain from typing any questions into the chat. That just helps us keep them organized. We will answer those at the end of the presentation in the order that they were received. There is no CEU for this webinar. We did apply with ISA, but they came back with that it didn't meet the correct requirements. So in this webinar is being recorded, so we will send that out to you tomorrow with a follow-up email, and it will also be available on our YouTube channel. Today's guest speaker is Tom Carman, Director of Arborist Development at Rainbow Treecare, and he will be talking about developing and training your consulting arborists. So with that, I will hand it over to Tom and we will get this started.
Great, thanks, Matt. I will share my screen here, get my presentation up, and we'll get rolling here. All right. Well, we're going to talk about developing and training consulting arborists today. This is something I've been doing here at Rainbow for quite a while. My background, I've been in the green industry for about 33 years. Started out at Rainbow Tree back in college, working as an injection technician, doing Dutch elm disease protection. Worked as a plant healthcare technician right after college. Was kind of fortunate to have somebody in the office mention to the founder of the company, Tom Prosser, that it would be good for me to maybe come in and help manage some of the operations of the business. I did that for quite a few years, and then moved into a role as a consulting arborist, and then finally my current role, which is the Director of Arborist Development. At a lot of tree companies, that might be equated with a sales manager, but I'll talk a little bit more about why we don't use that title here later in my presentation. So the objectives for today's meeting, I've got a lot of slides to cover. Just a reminder, if I don't remember if Matt mentioned it, but this will be available as a recording, so you'll be able to review this later to catch information that you wanted to write down, and you'll be able to pause and so forth. So feel free to know that that's going to be available if you're taking notes or you've got questions. But really want to talk about finding good consulting arborist candidates. What we've found has worked in some of the pitfalls that we've had with things that didn't work. What's in a name? Talking a little bit about consulting arborists versus salespersons. Identifying and document a training plan for your consulting arborist candidates, and understanding that training never stops. And so I'll cover all of those throughout the presentation here today. I will mention that this is always a little bit weird for me doing this as a webinar rather than an audience where I can see people's faces and see reactions. And so normally I would take questions as we go along, but to keep things flowing, they've asked that we do that all at the end. So I'll stay as long as is necessary to make sure that I get all those questions answered for everybody. So at Rainbow, what I've developed and inherited and added to over the years with our consulting arborist training, the first thing is we always want to find and hire quality arborists. So I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. We use a consultative sales process. I'll talk about why we do that and why we feel that's really important. We provide intensive training. It's critical to really, step up and spend the training. And I'll tell you, for companies, this is where most probably fall short, is the amount of work it takes. In fact, right now, I'm onboarding a couple of new people, and I'm always surprised at how much time it takes with new people. So, and I've been doing this for a very long time. You want to be able to provide management and mentorship as part of your training. And then finally, the ongoing training and support, what's needed with a consulting team to provide that ongoing support and mentorship and training and the management, all those things kind of meld together as you move further down the road with training. So finding and hiring quality arborists, kind of that first point. One of the things that we've found over the years is they've got to have excellent interpersonal communication skills. If you're doing interviews for people, or if you've got people that you're considering for the job, if they don't have these skills where they're comfortable talking with people, this is probably not going to work out well for them as a career. They've got to be comfortable interacting with customers. I actually had a person who admitted after doing this for a few years that they really didn't like talking with people like face to face. They would do emails, but they were always uncomfortable, interacting one-on-one with customers and, possible customers. And, it's something that your clients can sense too, that they're just not, it's not a good fit for them. And finally, one of the things that we found out over the years, in the early days, we probably hired more so for people because of their science background, that they had, the right degree, that they knew a lot about trees, or that they had a lot of really good field skills. They were great out there on a crew, and they could really bring in jobs and get a tree removal done quickly. And what we found is, if they're lacking in those communication skills and enjoy talking to people and being out there in that role, it doesn't matter how good they are on those other areas. This is an area that will absolutely hamper their effectiveness as a consultant. So one of the things we talk about is, do we want to hire people who are educated or experienced? Well, when we're looking for candidates, ideally, we want someone with a 4-year degree. Oftentimes, this is going to be in urban forestry or related field. We get quite a few people that might have natural resources background. My degree was actually in biology. So it doesn't have to be an urban forestry one. One of the things that getting a candidate that has a 4-year degree is really useful in, it tells you that they're willing to stick with something for a while. They were willing to, do the work and the time to get to a 4-year degree. ISA certification. Again, this is one of those ones that, depending on your opinion, ISA certification is really valuable, or it's not as valuable, but it's something that you need to have. What we found is, I think this is a good starting point for people. And it's also required by some of the cities that we work with, or municipal contracts. Many of them want to have an ISA certified arborist. Now, just having that alone doesn't make somebody a great arborist, but it is, something that it's like your ticket to entry. If you're not an ISA certified arborist, you can't even, no matter how good you are, you might not be able to bid on contracts or work in certain areas. So that's a critical item for us. And then we really would like them to have field experience, particularly in pruning and removals. So while we don't hire them specifically because of field experience, it is absolutely something that we take into account that we want to see. And we actually have an associate arborist program where we bring in people oftentimes that have been working out in the field area at our company, and they're getting that kind of field experience. We'll bring them into roles where they help during our busy season in the summer months with some of the more, I don't want to call them simple, but more dedicated activities like emerald ash borer. We have a lot of contracts with municipalities, and we have to have people go out and respond to those in a timely manner. We can train and work with them on that more limited area, and it's a great way for them to also find out whether or not this is something that they're interested in, maybe as a career. Another thing that you got to look at really is, are these candidates that you're going to bring in, are they going to be a cultural fit for your business? Do they share the same values as you and the rest of your team? And I can't stress enough the importance of that. When people don't share the same values, it generally isn't going to work out well. And do they have a work ethic that aligns with your current team? So, this is an industry where you have to work very hard at certain periods of the year, and still hard at other times, but not nearly as much time and energy as it takes during our busy season, if you will. And people need to understand right up front that, I usually describe it as it's going to be almost a ridiculous expectation on what you're going to need to do to be successful during our busy season, the number of hours you have to work. But that's offset with, for us during our dormant season, it's a much more laid back period. And so we work very hard, and we have a period where we're able to, be not working at that same kind of level. And then you want to make sure that they can see a future with your company. So the amount of time and energy it takes to really develop and train a good consulting arborist is years. And so what you don't want to be doing is investing all that time and energy in somebody who is not really looking to maybe stay there, or they're not sure if this is something that they even want to do. So you want to get really clear that this is somebody who's, maybe done work at other tree companies. They've worked in the field. They've done, whatever else they've done, and they're coming in confident this is what they want to be doing. Not as, hey, I want to try this out. One of the things that we look at is what are some of those key success factors for personal selling? And some of these things that are things that are, you're born with, and some of them are things that can be trained. Well, aptitude, if you ever heard of that kind of natural born salesperson, there are people who, they're just really good. Mostly it goes back to what I talked about at the very beginning. They have that, they're really comfortable. They like talking to people. They're good communicators. That's really probably more where the aptitude portion comes in. The motivation. That's something that, sometimes people are born with, or they develop maybe from their family and friends. But it's also something that can be developed with good management and putting people in positions where they realize the difference that they can make and the purpose that they can have in what they're up to and doing. That can be very motivating for people to find that purpose. It also makes, a lot of us here at Rainbow, myself included, this isn't just a job. This is kind of my career. It's what I've been doing for most of my life. And, it's probably the position I'll be retiring from as well. And so, really feeling motivated, getting up in the morning and feeling like, you're excited to do what you're doing. That is, difference making for people. Service and product knowledge. We're looking for people that have the ability to learn the things. Not everybody is going to come in, and they certainly aren't going to come in as new hires for us that already knowing, all about our products and the way Rainbow does stuff. So we can train and teach all of that. The selling skills, I'll talk a little bit about what we do for a kind of sales training that absolutely can be developed. And then a sales process that can also be developed. So really the good news is, across the board, most of the things that really are needed to do and develop a good consulting arborist are things that you can train and develop people on. But it does take a lot of work and process planning on your part to be able to do so. So what is a consultative sales process? Well, the way we look at it is the consultative sales process is primarily focused on the experience your customer feels and sees during their interactions with you. It's about the how you find ways to provide your customers with value and make it all about them, not your services. So it really, it's going out there, it's listening to what they're wanting. Sometimes what they say they want, you have to listen for, because what they're asking for isn't going to get them what they want as a result. So you want to be listening for what is it they're really looking for, and then provide them with what their options are, and do it in an interactive way versus us going out and telling people what they need. When you do that, it just doesn't work out well. So it's really a critical distinction for us. And we really do talk about it as us serving our customers, that what we're up to and committed to is making a difference in how they view and care their trees and the way it impacts the urban ecosystem. So when does that process begin? Well, for us, it starts with our customer service team. When a client calls in and they want to set up an appointment with us, we're able to send them some information. I'll show you in just a minute what that is. But we ask questions. In fact, I'm sure we ask more questions of clients than most do. Besides just getting their name and number information, the first thing we want to find out is, what are they looking for? Because sometimes what they're looking for, they might call and say, well, I'm really looking for somebody to, help me with a deck that we're putting on. Well, we don't build decks, so we wouldn't be the right company. But if what they're really asking about is what they can do to put that deck on and not damage their tree, then they're calling the right place. One of the things we always want to try and do is meet with new potential clients. I know that goes in the direct opposition to what some companies want to do. We have a couple of competitors here in town whose job, I think it is to get onto as many properties as they can in a day, give out as many proposals as they can, and kind of win, if you will, by getting enough people to say yes. We'd rather spend less time or more time with less people, and be able to have them see what we can offer. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that as part of our sales process as we continue on in this presentation. We send out bios of our consulting arborists prior to their visits via email. So once you set that appointment, we send you out a confirmation, and I'll show on the next slide kind of what that looks like. So don't worry about it if you're looking at this, especially if you're on a phone or something, you're not going to be able to read everything it says here. But this is kind of the email template that gets generated for people when we make an appointment. Basically at the top, it would have the actual date and time that it was being set for, but then it just says, hey, thanks for choosing us. We're excited to come out. Tells a little bit about our company. And then down below, it allows us to start creating that relationship with the person. It shows them who's coming out to their property. In this case, Jeff Rick, he's a ISA board certified master arborist. And where did he go to school? And why is Jeff doing what he's doing with us? And, gives all his contact information. So what we found is people read this, and it makes a huge difference on kind of creating credibility for us. Besides just confirming the appointment, they see who we are as a company. It gives that background, and it starts that relationship so that when you show up at the property, they already kind of know you a little bit. So before we send them out to the property, however, we provide some pretty intensive training. In fact, we start that hands-on. I'll talk about what those things are that we do, but we kind of have looked at all of the different areas. And there's arboriculture and science-based training that we do. Obviously, they need to know about trees and what our treatment recommendations are and how they work. Sales skills training. We want to talk about what our process is. How does that work? And for us, process really is everything. When you're out there doing stuff, when you have a process and you follow it, you get what we would call predictable results. It doesn't mean that you're successful every time, but we can predict pretty regularly what kind of success rate we would expect to have. And that also is a measurement that can be used to decide where we need to focus more training on, potentially for people. Organizational skills training. These are the things that over the years we identified as areas that we weren't training on originally, but they cause people to fail in this job. They're things that you just can't assume that people know how to do. Pricing training. We won't spend much time in this talk on it. I have a whole talk, I did one last week, but talking about pricing and how that works for your salespeople. And then technology and skills training. So I'm going to spend more time now going down each one of these areas and kind of give you a little bit of background on what we do. So with arboriculture and science-based training, you really want to determine what services make up the bulk of your revenues and focus the early training in those areas. So you really should be looking at abiotic, insect, and disease issues that are common in your area. So if you're already doing those, it's simple enough to look at, your revenues and break it up by area. With Rainbow, we have almost 400 protocols for treatment. Some things, if you look at some of the soil applied things that we do for treating an insect, we might, for the same bug, we might have imidacloprid or Zytect, Lepitect, Transtect, all as options for treating that insect. And some of the basis for it will be what time of year is it? That will impact which treatment you might want to use. For instance, something like Transtect is much more water soluble and it moves through the tree very quickly, but it doesn't last as long. So it's not as good for a longer term protection. But if you need to get a knockdown with an insect, that might be the best way to go. And then the next year you would follow that up with a soil applied treatment with maybe Zytect, which is a much more persistent product in the tree. So it provides that longer term protection. But what you find out is with all those protocols, only about 24 of them make up 90% of our revenue. So, we have some things that we have on our list that we treat once or twice, maybe 3 sites across the entire Twin Cities metro on any given year. And then there's others that we do at thousands of properties. So what we did is we looked at, the abiotic issues. We listed out pruning removals, which obviously, for us, it's about half of all the work we do. Cambistat, we consider that, even though it's a plant healthcare one, it's more as a proactive treatment, generally not done specifically for one item to prevent. Chlorosis, iron and manganese chlorosis deficiencies. That's something that we look at as an abiotic item. Root enhancement system, that's the term we use for using an air spade. So if you use an air spade, air knife, where you're loosening up the soil, adding organic matter, creating ideal growing conditions for tree roots, that's a service. And, that's something that's more recent for us. When I started in this industry, even 15 years ago, that really wasn't something we did. We did other types of things that were probably a lot less effective. Vertical mulching, we called it. We would bore holes into the ground. Radial trenching, some of you will know what I'm talking about with that. But that is really kind of a newer type thing for us. Root care fertilization, stem girdling roots. That's one that too, from the time I started in this industry 30 years ago, they used to just basically call it maple decline, if I remember correctly. And then researchers, for us, a guy named Gary Johnson at the U of M, and I know a lot of other people around the country have done a lot of work on how stem girdling roots impact trees. Well, they found out that it wasn't just that maple trees mysteriously declined, they were declining because they were being strangled by their own roots. Stump grinding and tree cabling. So those are the areas that, abiotic wise, that we look at. With diseases, things like apple scab, anthracnose, spur oak blight, sphaeropsis, also called diplodia shoot blight. I think that's changed 6 or 8 times during my career. As the people that name those things keep battling and changing it. Dophostroma needle blight, Dutch elm disease, oak wilt, rhizosphere needle cast. Again, you have to kind of continually evaluate these things. Bur oak blight 10 years ago really didn't exist for the most part. There was something we started to notice that bur oak trees here in the Midwest, especially down in Iowa, I don't remember the researcher's name down there, it's Tom something, but he started looking at it. And at this point now, he's kind of deferred to us. We're actually doing quite a bit of research and looking for it. We still have not found what we believe is the perfect protocol for it, but we're narrowing in on better strategies for that. And then finally with insects, these are the top ones that we treat: bronze birch borer, emerald ash borer, 2-line chestnut borer, spider mites, Japanese beetles, honey locust plant bugs, sawflies, and magnolia scale. And 3 of those that I have bolded back in the early days of my career, never even knew what a Japanese beetle was when I started out. Emerald ash borer, none of you would have known 30 years ago. It literally didn't even exist in the United States. But about 10 years ago, it entered the Twin Cities, and now it's probably our largest, item in plant healthcare that we contend with and work with people on. Magnolia scale, again, didn't exist here 10 years ago for the most part. Probably was present, but what really has changed is people are planting lots of these little ornamental magnolia trees. And with that being out in the environment, it's made it possible for magnolia scale to really become problematic here in the Twin Cities. It's become our new crabapple tree, for small ornamentals. So, the reason I look at this is early on in my career too, we used to do a lot of treatments for birch leaf minor, and birch leaf minor now is virtually non-existent in the Twin Cities. I believe some of the research I looked at, rising CO2 levels just being slightly higher somehow has reduced some of those populations, but just not something that we contend with or have to deal with much anymore. This is an example of something that we created, and you can take a look at from the slides. You can do whatever you want, but it's basically just using an Excel spreadsheet to kind of create a tracker. And one of the things we look at is each one of those things we talked about, we do some initial training. We might have a 1 to 2 or 3 hour block that we work with people on, where we have PowerPoint presentations and a treatment guide, and we walk them through their initial training. For some of them, we have a written examination where we have them answer questions about the insect or disease or how we treat it. And then one of the things that we find is really important is having them go out in the field with other people and hear the conversation. So you want to go out there and hear how one of our salespeople talks about Dutch elm disease, or emerald ash borer, or chlorosis. How do we talk about all the possible things that you could talk about with a customer and give them the information that they need to be able to make good recommendations and understand why we think the tree needs the treatment. And then eventually we want them to go out and have that conversation. And it really does take a lot of practice to go out there and have a conversation about any of these issues. And you struggle a little bit at first, and they're going to have a bit of a struggle. They'll go out there, they'll tongue twist themselves. I've had people, get people enrolled and then convince them basically not to end up doing the treatment because they kept going too long and almost talked them out of it. So it really does take practice to not only hear those conversations, but to go out there and we use the term generate a conversation. So if you've ever had somebody that thinks about it, or if you yourself, I can say I'm guilty of it too. If I've said, well, if I have to go out there and talk about emerald ash borer again today, I've had that same conversation 1,000 times. If you're thinking about it that way, that's exactly how your customer's going to hear it too. The reality is you've had 1,000 conversations about emerald ash borer, but each and every one of them was a brand new one. And if you can approach it from I'm generating it anew every time with each person that I'm having that conversation with, that's how it also will occur for that customer. And you can tailor that conversation then to whatever it needs to be for them to get what they need to be able to make a decision on what they want to do with their tree. We have a 7-step sales process. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but if we were doing this as training, it typically is about a 3.5 hour training process that we do. And a lot of these slides have, 10, 20 plus slides that we go through, and we talk about a lot of stuff, but and it's not important like that you would do what Rainbow does. Some people do, whatever you do. But it is important that you have some kind of way that you consider doing it. For us, the first step in our process is finding out what's important and then positioning yourself and the company. Our third step is asking permission to offer. Our fourth, educate your prospect as needed. Address one thing at a time, move to completion, and ask for referrals. So these are really the things that make up our 7 steps. So I'll briefly show you what I mean on each one of these terms. So finding out what's important, you go out there and you notice your client, you notice what surrounds them. You can look and sometimes you see people's backyards. You can tell they take pride in their property, the way they're caring for it, that it's important to them. And that's what you want to find out. You want to get interested in their world, what they're looking for, and you ask them questions. what are we looking at today? Why are we looking at that? Why is this important to you? It's amazing what people will tell you and how much that can help you get the right conversation about what they need to know. When you find out what's important, you want to kind of get permission to ask questions. And this kind of goes into the next step of our sales process too. But if you remember Larry King, who just passed away, actually, he would always start out his interviews with people by saying, "May I ask you a question?" Obviously, you came on to Larry King's show and you're a guest, you're going to get asked questions. That's why you're there. But by asking that question, he allowed somebody to say yes. Nobody's going to say no. But by them acknowledging and saying yes, you really open up a space for that person to be connected with you, and that they're, whatever you're going to tell them or whatever they want to find out, you are doing it with consent. And it really does make a big difference for people. Try it out sometime. When you position yourself in the company, really what it's about is having some kind of concise, user-friendly statement. It's 15 seconds maybe about yourself, the company, your experience, your credentials, what the company is about, what we're up to. Believe it or not, that makes a big difference for people in this area of work. People that are interested in taking care of their trees, oftentimes they're into the environment. They want to know what Rainbow is and why we're up to what we do. It's not just about making money. It's about making a difference in our community and the way people view their trees. And you've heard me probably say that a few times, because that's really what we're doing. We don't have to make it up. That's how we live everything that we're doing. And it's also something you don't want to have like it's something you're reading off a card. You can weave that in at different points throughout the conversation that you're having with somebody where it makes sense. In fact, one of the things that is really important, and we found, is another reason to have a process like this is if you're working with a customer and you get done with the appointment, you can kind of go through and kind of run down this checklist. In fact, a couple of years ago, one of my top salespeople said he was kind of running down the list, and he was, as he had driven away, and he realized he forgot to tell that customer, he'd just given him a couple $1,000 bid on pruning and removal work, and he forgot to tell him about our crews and why our crews are who he wants to have coming out and do their work. So he called the guy back, and and the guy goes, "Calling me back already?" And he said, "Actually, I'm not calling to find out if you wanted to go ahead with the work yet. I realized, that I forgot to mention to you about our crews." And he went on for about a minute to tell him about that. And the guy goes, "Well, that's interesting, because, I was thinking about your bid and I really liked you and you seem knowledgeable. But in the past, what I've not been impressed with is the people that came out to do the work. So, I really appreciate you calling me back. In fact, why don't we just get this scheduled?" And so it turned out to be the exact thing that customer wanted to know about. And by kind of going down this, kind of checking it out, what you'll find is when you follow this process, it doesn't mean we're going to get a sale, but at least you know that we're not missing out on the things that are likely to not get us a sale, like the information that the client's going to need to be able to make a good choice, a good informed decision. Asking permission to offer. You can ask people a question, but when you want to offer up services, you're not going to say it exactly like this, but this is probably one of the most important things. And that is, I'm a professional arborist. If I notice something else that's important regarding your other trees or landscape, would you like me to mention it while I'm here? I can't think of too many times in my career where somebody said, "No, I don't want to know what else you see." In fact, sometimes you can actually ask this question without even saying anything. Sometimes you're walking around a property with somebody and you stop to look at a tree and you pull a branch down and you look a little more closely and just wait a second. And the person will say, "What are you looking at?" That's basically them giving you permission to answer the question. And you can mention what it is. Oftentimes it's something that doesn't need attention, but at least they'll know that it doesn't need any attention. Or you can say, it's this. If you'd like, I could put that as a separate recommendation on your proposal. They're like, "Okay, great. I really like that." So what people don't like is when they called you out there to remove a tree and you give them that bid along with 10 other items on there that they never even asked for. People inherently kind of bristle at that. So by getting this simple little thing of getting them to give you the permission to offer those things, it makes a huge difference in how it's going to occur for them. It'll be really a contribution to them rather than you trying to make a sale. Educating your prospect, and I put on here as needed. One of the things we found over the years is that some of our consultants, they get really excited when we've trained them well, and there's so much information they want to tell people. Sometimes clients don't want to know all that. So we want to explain what we need to as we're walking around and educate people. But sometimes you have to simply ask the question to somebody, is this something you want to like learn more about? And then sometimes people, you know, they're busy, they've got a lot of things going on, or sometimes people will just answer, you know what, you guys seem like you know what you're talking about, or I've heard such good things about you. Is this something you can take care of? Can you get it fixed? And that's what they want to know. So that's what I always say, as needed. You don't want to educate people by force. You want to do it when it's what's needed to help them make a good informed decision about, you know, is this something I want to be taken care of? In fact, one of the things, you know, sometimes to ask is this tree valuable to you? Sometimes people are like, no, I hate this tree. And if you go and spend a bunch of time explaining to them what they could do to make it better, you know, you're just wasting their time and yours. And sometimes people are almost relieved and you're like, well, I could just give you a removal bid for it. You know, some people they think there's something like bad about taking down a tree. It makes them a bad person. Sometimes there's trees that they should come down, and they'd be much better off getting rid of and maybe putting in something better that would be more appropriate for the space, or that would, you know, in 10 or 15 years would be a good tree, whereas the other one never is going to be. I mean, you can do that, you know, with this education stuff with brochures, fact sheets, portfolios, video clips, all kinds of different things. You know, fact sheets, we used to do these all as, you know, printed out copies. It really helps people understand why you're recommending, what the service is, how the treatment is done. Nowadays, we do these a lot more as PDF copies, digital copies that go attached with the proposals that we send. So just a lot of different pieces here, but, you know, whatever you have, some people will call these sell sheets, but people want to know what they're buying. If they don't understand what it is, they're going to be less likely to go ahead with the treatment. Even sometimes if they don't really still understand when they read this, they know at least that it's something, and they can also go on the internet and they can look this stuff up and confirm that it's appropriate and it fits in with what you're recommending. Sounds like it would solve the problem for them. It also allows your customers to kind of become your IPM scouts. So oftentimes, you know, we have customers out there, they'll tell us exactly when Japanese beetles start feeding. We still see that stuff with our residents, but with all of our salespeople going around, I mean, we're seeing that stuff too. But it's always helpful to have, you know, we only have so many people, especially for some of the things we don't treat a lot of. If you let clients know and educate them about what the timing might be for a certain thing based on when a certain plant starts flowering, you know, they'll call in and say, hey, my such and such just started flowering. It's like, great. Yeah, we were about ready to go on that kind of treatment anyway. So it's super helpful. And when these get shared out there to other people, you know, we call it a primary client generator. Garden centers and places like that, they'll share these kinds of documents with people, and then they give us a call. You want to address one thing at a time, kind of our fifth step in the sales process. So, you know, people can only focus on one thing. So you want to go down point by point with what you're recommending, the specifics about what that is, and kind of get sort of an acknowledgement or an approval from them. Like, and you can watch them nod their head, or you know, it also gives you an opportunity to answer any objections they might have, or get clear, make sure you understood what they were asking for, or the specific recommendation on what pruning is going to be done. And then you go down and just do that for each item. And then step 6 is moving to completion. move forward with the logical outcome of all those previous agreements, sum it up for kind of final approval. And then I always say, ask the question. And for whatever reason, I found with new salespeople, they're sometimes almost afraid to just ask people this basic little question like, hey, is this something you'd like to get scheduled? You've gone out there, you've met with them, you walked through all this stuff. And I'll be honest, when I first started doing sales, I had some that I didn't ask that to, and they would call in weeks later and say, when were we going to be out to do the work? And of course, I would pivot right away. Well, let me check with the scheduling area. And what I didn't say was, I didn't even know you wanted to go ahead with the work because I didn't ask this question. We didn't have this kind of training. But it's so simple. And it really, people expect it. It's not like they're going to be offended that you ask that question. And it's needed. And it also will allow, again, for some objections, well, it's not really the right time, or, wow, this is a lot more money than I thought it was going to be to prune all these trees. Your bid is $3,000. I really only had $1,500, budgeted. At that point, then we're able to say, well, great. You know what? A lot of people don't realize how much it might cost to do these trees. But if you'd like, what I could do is I could help you pick out the most pressing ones, and we could start there. And then we could come back next year and do pruning on some of the other trees. And people are really appreciative, actually, of helping them work with that. And then getting a signature. We get a signature, whether it be a physical signature or an email confirmation on all the work we do. In fact, many of you might be in a state where it's required for the different types of work, particularly if you're applying any kind of chemical. And then the last thing is asking for referrals. If you don't ask, people won't offer them. They might not think you want or need the referrals. I actually had a client one time tell me, well, Tom, I thought you guys were so busy that you really didn't need any new customers. Nobody's ever going to admit that. Sometimes it feels that way in our busy season, but you want to let them know. And typically, with the way we operate with clients, by the time we get done meeting with somebody, even sometimes where we end up not doing the work for that person, they'll refer us to other people because they found out we weren't really, or what we told them wasn't really going to help them out, but they'll sell us to other people because the way we interacted with them made them feel good. And we also find that some of our clients, especially with our younger salespeople, they can envision back when they were new in their business, and they will look for an opportunity to want to refer you when you've done a good job for them because they want to help you out. They think of it like they've got kids that just graduated from college, and they know how hard they've heard the stories from their kids and how hard it is to get going in their career. And so they feel good about actually recommending you. They look for opportunities to bring your company up when you do a good job for them. The organizational skills training, we're not going to spend a lot of time on these, but this is stuff you should ponder. What are the skills in your business that need training for your salespeople? And how are you providing that training? These are the questions you should be asking yourself as a manager or an owner. And these are some of the things that we found that people were lacking. Appointment and time management skills. Some people that are really good at these things, that are very personable, they're not good at this stuff. And so you need to train them and show them how they can use software and other tools. Follow-up calls. How do you conduct those follow-up calls? What's the expectation on doing that? So you've gone out and done all the proposals. How are you going to follow up with those people? Stuff like mileage reporting. How are they going to get paid for? Are they driving a company vehicle or their own vehicle? And how do they get paid on those things? How to do networking with people in the industry. Customer service training. They're just another person that's working in customer service when you're doing sales. There are renewal letters. What are you doing with sending out stuff? How do you build up the recommendations throughout a year and then send those out as either an annual plan or renewals? Territory management. What is involved with the area that they work? What kinds of stuff should they be doing to manage and handle that? Telephone training. How do you speak on the phone? Especially with a lot of the younger generation, there's a lot of texting that goes on. And we use texting too. That's actually something that I don't have on the list, but what's the protocol and how do you do stuff with texting? Well, telephone training is important. Conversations with clients, as I mentioned, with the training about our services, conversations, everything that you do with a client happens in a conversation. And so how do you have those conversations with clients in a powerful way? And then the educational pieces, the car sheet, we used to have these fact sheet tubs in the cars where we would pull out the different paper sheets. Now, again, we do that all in PDF versions, primarily with links. And the nice part about that is anytime we make revisions, the clients get the most current copy if they click the link again. And ultimately, you want to have a process for almost everything. This is just kind of showing our follow-up process. You've sent out a proposal within 72 hours, you follow it up. What if they say yes to it? Well, it moves to scheduling. What if they say no, or you don't get an answer on it? Then you follow it up again 7 days later. What if you get no response, et cetera? And we've kind of flow charted out that stuff. And it seems almost basic, but if you've got somebody new, this is the way you develop good habits. This is the way you build a great salesperson, if you will, and give them the support that they're going to need. And it really will help you as you onboard and train additional people. It's more work up front, but in the long run, it works out really well for you. So pricing training, this is the only slide I'm going to talk about it, but you've got to have really easy to understand pricing guidelines for all the services that you do. If you're an owner operator and you're looking to add that additional salesperson, if they don't have the good guidance here, a lot of times they'll simply not recommend some of those plant healthcare services or other services because they don't want to disappoint the boss by not having the prices be what the boss is expecting. And you want to make sure that your clients your people that are doing your consulting and sales work, that they can understand and talk to customers about the prices we've given them. Why are they different? Why might we be charging more than one of our competitors? And you can give them a good explanation about that. And you want to understand how to best present your services, even how you put the different stuff together on proposals. If you're going to be proposing a lot of different services, breaking it up into having the pruning removal stuff maybe on one section or one proposal and another one that has the plant healthcare items on it, or even multiple proposals, people are much more able to break down and look at each one of those segments as something manageable, rather than this big, overwhelming, giant proposal. And if you want to, get more information on that, talk to your RTSA territory arborist for ideas. They do have some of the ways I've developed pricing models and pricing sheets. They've got some guides that will help you with that. Technology and skills training. We're going to kind of keep this moving here because I want to get us finished up in time. Database training, whatever software you're using, Arborist Tools, macroscopes, magnoscopes, laser pointers, using a resistograph, soil sampling, the diagnostic process. There's one I'll show you something on. If you've never seen it, it's fantastic. The tree identification of common trees and shrubs in your area, and then site workup skills with inventories and mappings. These are all things that we do actual training on. We have a session on. Some might be only 30 minutes, some might be an hour or two. But we actually go through this training with everybody. There's just an example, obviously, of some of those tools. If you've not seen them, it's something to be able to look more closely magnified, more than a hand lens with those magnoscopes. They're pretty cheap on Amazon. I think it's like $50, $60. Soil samplers, green lasers are great for pointing out branches to customers on what you want to take off. This is something, if you want a fantastic document, we haven't even tried to improve on this one because it's so good. But Joe Boggs at the Ohio State University has this document on 20 questions on plant diagnosis. It's fantastic. It really helps, your people get trained in on what you should be looking for. How do you do diagnosis out there when something's wrong with the tree, or finding out sometimes that there's nothing wrong. That's what it's supposed to look like. We also have a listing of all the trees and shrubs that we expect people to learn, and we break them up into varying levels. There's some that we expect, at the associate level, they should know in our area because they're common. Then there's some that are a little more advanced and some that you rarely see here in the Twin Cities. And so it's a way to have a checklist almost for people to start feeling comfortable about what they do and don't know how to identify. And then finally, the last few slides here, management and mentorship. You really have to have daily, weekly, and monthly contact with those consulting arborists. If you're their manager, they need to know that you've got their back and that you're checking in with them, not to oversee them all the time, but to really support them. We have something called management by objectives, which I'll explain here in just a second. You want to make sure that you're going through their sales plans, their goals and pay structure, that they know where do they stand at any point during the year. And then doing what we call ride-alongs with trainers. Nowadays, we call them follow-alongs because we don't have people riding in the same vehicles. You know, so you give up a little bit of that time you can talk in between appointments, but we'll get back to these soon enough. But and then being readily available for questions. You want to know that they can call you. I mean, I've had new arborists calling me 6-7 times in a day with questions. And what you don't want them to feel is that they're putting you out or that it's an inconvenience. They need to know that you can reach them, and they will get less. But anytime somebody's asking me a question, I'm kind of glad, because otherwise I'm thinking it's one more thing that we're going to avoid, where they made something up or they didn't know the right answer and then something went bad and we're gonna have to deal with it later. Really with the management mentorship, you know, a few years ago, we kind of focused on 4 services. Emerald ash borer, you know, we saw about a 72% growth over that year when we focused on that area. Tree nutrition, about 62%. Cambistat, 143% we grew our Cambistat applications. And unfortunately, you know, you can't win them all. Soil care, we actually saw a little bit of a decline in. But by putting a focus on these things, really kind of emphasizing them at our sales meetings, it made a difference. Management by objective is something that I don't even remember where I heard about this, but basically I have something each quarter that they can earn part of their pay by accomplishing. And it's each quarter, and then each salesperson, sometimes it's not the same for every salesperson. So it's custom sometimes to what they need to develop. And typically it measures actions that they take, not like being successful in selling something, but it really promotes them to try new things or to propose more of a service and practice those conversations. And this is an example of what we did with the Cambistat. If you look at in 27, we made 297 proposals with our team during the third quarter, and we sold about $72,000. In the following year, we made an emphasis. I told them they all had to do a certain number per person of recommendations on it. So they had to look for places where they could make that recommendation. We more than doubled our recommendations. And what you'll see is we ended up selling about $175,000 of that work, which is a huge improvement, simply because they had the conversations and they made the recommendations to people. Rather than focusing on you know, where I said, hey, you got to sell more of this. People can always, you know, resist that by saying, well, I can't control what people buy, but they absolutely control having this conversation, working on it. And typically, you know, I'm pretty confident that if people take the actions, they'll get the results, because I've seen it myself. I've seen it with others. So finally, you know, a daily sales report, they have to be able to see, you know, what does it look like? What was their actual amount that they've sold each day? What was their goal for the month? What did they do that month last year? What's the goal? You know, how much do they have left? Their average per day? You know, your salespeople really need to be able to see that stuff in order to know where they stand. And the last 2 slides, I think, ongoing training and support. You've got to have regularly scheduled consulting arborist sales and technical meetings where you talk about what you're seeing out there. It's a great way to talk about a timely topic, you know, something that like oak wilt is just starting to show up in our area, making sure everybody's clear about the protocols on oak wilt. It's a time for acknowledgement on what people have been doing well, and also people to bring in a sample or to ask questions amongst their peers. Doing one-on-one meetings between the manager and the different sales people. Each one of your consultants, you know, you've got to be meeting with them individually to see what it is they're struggling with. What can we help on? You know, showing them results and what they can make a difference on. Manager and arborist ride-alongs. or arborologist. If none of you are familiar, that's a rainbow term for the people that we have that educate and train about tree care. The peer ride-alongs, going out with others that do the same job, so having a newer consulting arborist go out with somebody else or with somebody that's just really good at a certain area. And I usually call this the tree version of the rule of thirds. And I'll show you on a slide here in just a second what that looks like. But and then providing measurable data or examples when giving constructive feedback. So rather than saying, hey, you need to work on, how you're bidding on large tree removals, you come in with some jobs and you show, what the job looked like, how did the hours come out, and talk about where they might not have taken into account the right amounts and what they could do to improve that. Far more effective when you do it in that manner than just showing them maybe numbers that are not satisfactory and saying, do better. That rule of thirds model, really what I'm showing here is on any service that you've got in your company, not everybody's always going to be great at selling it. In fact, on here, the reason I use this one is there's a few people that are in that kind of red area. They don't sell very much of this service with our soil care, but they're the leaders in every other area. And then we've got other people that they'd sell this. It's like second nature. They see it, and there's something that the way they're relating to it that's very different. And so when I say the rule of thirds, what you want to do is you want to pair up people that might be in that lower section that maybe aren't as good or don't understand the conversations that they want to have with people, and pair them up with people where they can go out and see how they talk about it, and it changes for them the way that they would talk about it and bring it up with clients. So that's really, I think, about what we have time here for today. So I'll open it up to questions with Matt and see if there's anything that I can answer for people specifically here.
All right, thanks, Tom. Real quick, I'll blow through these really quick. We will get to the questions, and those will be recorded. So if some of you do have to jump off, that will be included in the recording that gets sent out to you. Feel free to sign up for our other upcoming webinars. We have a few more Build Your Plant Healthcare Business coming up in April. We also have different topics, including spotted lanternfly, emerald ash borer, and scale insect management. All right. And there will be a short survey when you log out. Please take the 5 minutes to fill that out. That helps us to figure out which topics to bring in next year and how we can further improve. All right, and then we will open it up for questions. So first one is, do you have any resources on bur oak blight?
Yeah, I don't know what they mean by resources. Kent Honnell at our company kind of is leading up the area. We've been doing some research with a number of different municipalities, a couple of golf courses. We're trying out different protocols, different products, different timings, trying to come up with something that's more predictable with the results. Right now, there are some protocols for injecting Alamo fungicide, propiconazole, in the very early spring. We get pretty good control, except when we don't, when it's completely non-existent on about a quarter of the trees, don't respond in the way that we would like to. And that's just not predictable enough for us. We'd like to know that, if we do a certain kind of treatment. So we're still investigating and looking for better solutions to that one.
Yeah, and I will say, I think Patrick Anderson works pretty closely with a lot of the research and development that kind of goes back and forth from Treecare and RTSA as well. So he can probably help you out with that. Next question: what is the average age of your people when they begin consulting arborist training, or how many years of experience do they typically have?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of. I would say that a lot of them are in their probably 25 to 30 years old is when they start that training. Although you could argue that many of them started the training when they started working out maybe on one of our technical crews, because I think that training, while they weren't directly, maybe on the track yet to working as a consulting arborist, they are developing real world practical skills on understanding how these treatments are done, the applications, how much time does it take to prune and remove a tree. One of the greatest things you can learn about out there on a crew is how much wood weighs. You know, and when you're looking at a tree removal in somebody's backyard and you're trying to figure out how you're going to get all that stuff forwarded and out to the street, that's, you know, being involved on a crew and understanding that it's learning that you can't get from a book. But probably 25 to 30 is pretty typical.
Right, next question. I refer consulting arborist for level 3 inspections. If I call myself a consulting arborist, how do I differentiate between the two?
You know, it again, for us, it's a term we use. I know that at some people, some companies, they'll call their salespeople their arborist salesperson, or their whatever they might call it. Look at it and decide what is it you want to do. We call it a consulting arborist because we're going out there to consult with people and make recommendations in that kind of consultative process. Honestly, I don't know that I have a great suggestion for you, but think about what it is you're trying to accomplish that when you go out there, and have the name represent or reflect that. And you may want to change the term that you use for the doing the inspections at a certain level. Have that person actually get a new title that would be more specific to that type of visit that's going to occur for the customer and what they're up to. Can involve stuff with hazard diagnosis and so forth.
Right, and next one, do you keep inventory and management data for customers? And if so, do you use Tree Plotter and sell that as a service, or just use it as a tool?
We actually do a lot of management. We inventory out the trees on the properties we're working on. Typically, all the trees that are in the managed area of a property. That may build over time, especially on big sites or commercial properties. We might not do all of the inventory initially until the client shows us that they're going to work with us, at which point we will expand that inventory. But yes, we collect and manage that all. And really, it's the only way that we're able to be accountable for making all the various recommendations that a customer needs, and that we're doing it in the right timings and renewal periods. If you're not doing that, it becomes very difficult I believe, to do that effectively. Not only that, but it makes it difficult to understand what else is on a property. That can impact what you make for recommendations on the trees that you do know are on the property. So that's, and we use actually, we've been working here more recently with ArborGold, and we're using the newer portion of their software for doing tree mapping and plotting. And we also do that in conjunction with large properties. We use the Esri software with ArcGIS, and that integrates in with the ArborGold to allow us to create more complex inventories and do some things that software just simply can't do.
All right, and next one, do any of your people actually do arboricultural consulting, appraisals, legal work, risk assessment, reporting? Sounds as if they're actually sales arborists.
Yep. And I do get that some people will consider consulting arborists people that do more of the report writing, those types of things. We do a little bit of that. We're not really, we don't want to get involved a lot in legal litigation. We do, however, do risk assessment. We'll do more detailed reports for people. I've done them over the years. For instance, one of the golf courses we work with had these two giant silver maples that overlooked a big open area, and where they had parties and gatherings. Half of the membership wanted them cut down, half of them wanted them kept no matter what. And so they needed somebody to come in and do a independent appraisal of the conditions on the trees and let them know, what really kind of risk were they keeping by having those trees there. So we do that at times, but we are more about, really helping people look at what they need to do with caring for their trees, none of us would really describe ourselves as just salespeople or doing sales. And it may sound silly or, a little airy fairy to some people, but we really are about going out there and educating people and helping them make good decisions about caring for their trees. People relate to trees, at least in the Twin Cities here. They love trees, and people like to keep them healthy. And the people that I have quote doing sales can't imagine doing anything else. In fact, I remember at a young age saying the one thing I never wanted to do in life was be a salesperson. I'm not a salesperson. I'm really an educator. I train people that educate people about their trees so they can make good decisions. That's it.
All right, and looks like we got one more question. Our arborist sales team loathe pricing and making PhD sales. How can I fast track a pricing sheet for our top 5 things that sales teams can use? You mentioned you have pricing structures that we can obtain through sales reps.
Yeah, so I will tell you that there's no service in this industry that I've ever found that I haven't been able to put a pricing guide on. Things like tree spraying, even the way we look at those is the size, the diameter sizes of the trees. We charge a certain amount based on a certain listing the ranges, up to 3 inches, from 4 to 6 inches, 7 to 12 inches, and so forth. So you can easily look at what the size is of the first tree, which includes maybe the site visit trip charge, if you will. And then if they had 5 more of those same size trees on the property, they might be, a fraction of that each. And that's how you come up with the price. Other things, it's based off the diameter sizes of the trees for the product, or the square footage of the canopy for things like fertilizing or soil work with air spades and things like that. Even stump grinding. You can look at a tree. One of the biggest mistakes people make is charging by the diameter inch. You can do that, but you can't charge a flat rate. Stumps become, it goes up exponentially, not linear, in the amount of work and volume that you've got to do as stump sizes increase. So anything can just about be put out. And the real advantage to that is it allows you, if you have people using a consistent method to price, you can analyze the results with a lot more confidence and know exactly what adjustments will get you to where you want to be with those results, whether that be an amount per hour, a certain profitability measurement, whatever it might be. So if you have any specific questions, always feel free to reach out to me if you got one that you're not really sure about what to do. But they do have a lot of the stuff I've developed. They have a model where you can put in certain things like your product and labor costs and help it to generate, and show you at least a template of what it could look like.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom, and thanks everyone for joining today. That is all the time we have, and that was all the questions. Like I said, the recording will get sent out tomorrow, and have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thanks everybody for attending, and Matt, talk to you later.
Sounds good.